So now we're gonna move on to the color stuff, the part you've all been waiting for, waiting with bated breath. The first thing that I like to do when I color grade is I will start playing with gradient maps. And again, the gradient map is that kind of split toning thing that we were talking about earlier. So I am gonna take this way down to about 10%, and I'm gonna start messing around in our presets. And so for me, I really like purple, green, and orange. And I'm gonna mess around and keep kind of pulling our green up and down to see what I like until we get to a nice spot. And so all of these colors are starting to sort of blend together. If it's off versus on, everything is kind of compressed from a color perspective. It's flowing into one another. You'll notice that we used a secondary triadic color scheme here, again with that kind of layering of different color harmonies. I think it's okay to do that. This is looking a little too heavy-handed here, so I'm going to back off to about 5%. But again, just kind of toggling this on and off. It's going to affect our color. Our color is going to kind of flow better together. It's also affecting our luminosity because what's happening is our shadows are getting this kind of lighter purple fill, which is going to brighten them, and then our highlights are going to get an orange fill, which is going to darken them. So again, we're compressing that dynamic range even more when we use a gradient map. If you don't like it, if it's a bit too much, you can just set that to color, which I think looks pretty good here. And then it's only going to affect the color, it's not going to affect the luminosity. So the next thing that I like to do is I start playing around with color lookups. And I don't know if any of you guys have used color lookup tables before, but they're pretty cool. It's kind of like a preset, and LUTs are typically used for cinematography. So I usually set that to about 30% and then just kind of cycle through our different presets here. 3-strip look is nice. It just kind of adds a little bit of a warm glow to it. I typically am hanging out around our crisp winter here. And I really like this here because it's just kind of popping the blues. It's making them look a little bit more saturated, a little bit more blue coming through the window here. And it's kind of just taking away a bit of that warm tinge that we have. And when we do that, we're shifting that balance of that color wheel again to something that's a little bit more neutral. So next I'm gonna go and hang out in selective color a bit. I don't really go into these colors too much unless there's a color I know I really want to shift. I'm usually just hanging out in the whites and the neutrals and blacks here. And for me, something that I really like to do is I like to bring a little bit of cyan into the highlights, particularly because I like what it does to our skin tones. What I mean by that is our skin tones typically have kind of an orange undertone. And so when we come in, we add a little blue there. It just adds some really nice kind of micro color harmonies there. So we've got the overall primary triadic color harmony. We sort of infused our secondary triadic color harmony with our gradient map. And now we're coming in and we're playing around with our complementary color harmony in the skin tones. So again, it's kind of about this layering upon layering of different color harmonies and making them work together. So this is pretty subtle here. Kind of have to crank it pretty high to get it to do something, but it's getting a little bit in the side of her face here. It's definitely coming through the windows a bit, which looks pretty nice against our orangey golds in the curtains. And for our shadows here, I want to infuse a little bit more blue. We've got our blue in the walls, and that's really kind of our only accent. And right now, our shadows are fairly neutral. We don't really have a lot of color in these shadows. So what I'm going to do is try and see how it looks if we add a little bit of blue in there. So I'm just going to actually, oops, sorry, I'm on my whites layer here. Go to blacks, which is our shadows. I'm going to start pulling down our yellow, and you can be really subtle with this. I feel like one of those questions that's asked all the time is how much color is too much, and I feel like that's a really complicated question to answer, and I don't have an exact answer for it. Really, it just kind of becomes about training your eye. And when I teach color to people, typically the first couple times that they show me their finished product, it's just like they've gotten the concepts of color harmony, they've grasped it, they can apply it. It's just turned up to 11. It's a little bit too much. And this is just something that comes with time. You're gonna start that way. It's okay. And eventually you're gonna train your eye to recognize subtle color in a much more subtle way. And eventually you'll just kind of develop an eye for it, and you'll be able to recognize when something's overdone or underdone and when you can push the envelope a little bit more. So again, this is just kind of adding a little bit of blues into those shadows there. And then what I like to play around with is our photo filters. So again, that's that kind of overall filter effect. I usually am hanging out in cooling filter, yellow. The yellow looks pretty nice back here, but I'm not loving what it's doing to the blue. Cyan looks pretty good here. It's a little too much. I'm going to back this down to something that's pretty subtle here. I'm just adding a little bit of a blue kick. And so I like kind of the overall palette of this, but I want to crank up our saturation a little bit. I like really saturated colors. That's a personal preference for me. Some people do really great color work with really subtle palettes, but I just want to make things pop. Again, kind of that, it invokes more of that happy, nostalgic vibe here. I just want to make it feel lively and a little bit more current too. So I'm going to come into our saturation, and we can try it just bumping everything up first, which is generally okay, but I think especially like kind of in our face and in the yellows in the back, it's becoming a little bit much for me. So I'm going to reset that and then just go into my reds here and start bumping that up. So now we're getting some really nice depth to this chair and to this chair, and it's all coming together there. We've got a little bit of red in the beams up here, so that's now tying into the chair. The chair is a little bit more and into the baseboard here. Might even go up a smidge more. It's affecting her face a little bit because she's got some red there, so I'm just gonna mask that out. Right there. And again, you know, when I add these layers, I feel like they're pretty subtle when you add them one by one. There's not a lot to it. And you're thinking, well, what are we even doing here? But when we group them all together and turn everything off and then back on, you're gonna see we're gonna have a pretty impactful difference. And I think working in layers is nice. It's a way to train your eye so that you're not just kind of getting overwhelmed by color. You can see the different layers and the different steps. You can go back and you can change stuff. And then you've got all these layers. You can go crazy and you can duplicate it if you want, which is a little wild here, but sometimes that's something I do in my images, and I'll duplicate all of my color group and it's like double the fun. So here, even with all of that duplicated to 30%, I think that still looks pretty good. So I like duplicating this. I'm gonna pull it down just a little bit more. Again, this is that kind of one of those situations where it's like when you first do it, you're like, whoa, that's crazy. And then we can just kind of back down the intensity of it. And that little bit of extra is nice. It's adding some more blues into here. Our reds are staying really saturated. A couple other things that I'm noticing here, I might want to play around a little bit more with our luminosity. And so what I might do at the end of all this is kind of go back and do our dodging and burn layer. Usually I just dodge and I don't burn, but that's not always true. Brush, super low opacity. I might come in here and just brighten up Mom a little bit. Maybe a bit much. I want to make sure we see her back there, so I'm just going to add a little bit of lightness to her there. I want to make sure that all of these really nice highlights are getting noticed too, so I'll just come in and I'll basically just kind of retrace all of the existing highlights that we have. So all of this nice detail on our legs, showing off that gold, the highlights on our couch. She's got a nice sheen on her arm here. I'm not retouching her face at all. It's too small and she's a 10-year-old kid, so she doesn't really need anything. And this is just another nice way to sort of add some detail and add some interest back in here. I want to see every single fold of these curtains. And again, notice I'm using like a pretty non-specific approach to this. I'm just kind of broad brushing it. I think our older sister could probably use a little bit more attention here. She's a little bit dark compared to her surroundings, so I just want to brighten her up a bit, get those nice details in her crinkly dress. I love all that texture. I really wanted to show. I think it adds some character to the scene. And again, this is just kind of this painstaking process of going in and highlighting everything. No dominoes were harmed in the making of this image, except for this guy, or one fallen soldier. Cool. So again, this is just kind of drawing our attention to certain places. It's not really about dodging and burning to correct. It's really just more to enhance and to draw our eyes to certain details in the frame. So again, just once more showing everything. So this is our before image. And this is our after image. Again, just kind of building up that color in subtle layers, but you'll notice that when everything's all said and done, it's going to make a huge impact on our overall image.